Howdy all, Wyrm here. If you were to compare raiding in A Realm Reborn to raids you see today, you'd see a great many differences. In this video, we will be going over what raiding was like in the first raid of A Realm Reborn, the Second Coil of Bahamut. The Second Coil of Bahamut, also known as BCOB, was the first raid featured in FF14 upon its re-release in 2.0. The dungeon was level 50, and like raids today, required a full party of 8 players. To unlock this raid, players had to complete Ifrit, Garuda and Titan hard mode trials. Afterwards, they then went to speak with Urianger in the Waking Sands and complete a questline called Primal Awakening. The end result of this would be the unlocking of BCOB, the entrance of which was in Wineport. Unlike today, groups had to go to the entrance of the raid to enter the dungeons. One of the primary standouts of these raid dungeons was the inclusion of trash mobs that groups had to grind through in order to reach the boss, and you had to re-clear these after each reset. BCOB consisted of 5 separate dungeons, known and referred to by players as turns. Turn 1 was pretty unique, for not only did it contain the main boss, but it had a mini-boss at the beginning of the raid. This is ADS, short for Allegan Defense System. ADS served as a checkmark of sorts. If your group could take it down, it showed you were ready. ADS had a bunch of mechanics that you would see throughout BCOB, so killing them was proof that you had the right group for the job. The boss of this turn was Caduceus. This boss stacked a buff every 30 seconds, so the party had to drag slime mobs to him to clear them after they had been weakened to 25%. The boss splits in two at 60%, and to kill both without wiping the raid, both needed to die around the same time. They also needed to be kept apart or they would re-merge and stack their buffs, usually wiping the raid. This boss, like the mini-boss before, served as a great way of ensuring a raid group was ready, as it required communication and cooperation. Turn 2 is one of the most unique raids in FF14. It consisted of the main boss, ADS, but not the same one you faced in Turn 1. To get to him, you had to clear a bunch of rooms that contained ADS type mini-bosses, called nodes. There were 2 routes to the main ADS boss, but you had to kill multiple nodes to get there. Each time one of these nodes dies, the main ADS boss gained its abilities. Essentially, you can craft what abilities ADS will have in the main fight by the nodes you kill. The main mechanic of this turn is the timer. Once you engage the first node, a charge timer will start ticking down in the chat. Once it reaches 0, it wipes the raid. ADS could be a complicated boss depending on how many nodes you killed and how many abilities it gained. So it was an aim for serious groups to kill all the nodes to take down ADS at its max level. The main ability you need to contend with during this boss fight is an ability called Allegan Rot, the bane of many groups back then, and is referenced by many today when similar mechanics appear. This was a debuff that had to be passed from person to person, or it would kill the person carrying it. Once a player passed on the Rot, they couldn't pick it up again for 40 seconds. Rot is cast multiple times in the fight, and with the charge timer ticking down, groups couldn't afford to get it wrong. Turn 3 is without a doubt the strangest raid in FF14. This turn is a very large area that consists entirely of trash mobs, no raid bosses to be seen. The group simply needs to grind through them, activate some consoles, and proceed through the exit and jumping puzzle, which would lead to the entrance to Turn 4. There were random chests all around, but just contained potions and the like. We never got a solid answer as to what the deal was with Turn 3. Groups would search the raid top to bottom, but find nothing. The best theory out there is it was meant to be a legitimate raid, but they simply ran out of time to develop it before A Realm Reborn launched, or that it was simply supposed to be a light distraction between the 2 main parts of BCOB. Turn 4, for many groups, is where things got difficult. This was a fight on a single stage with no raid boss. Instead, you had to fight through 6 waves of mobs, each with unique mechanics to reach the end of the raid. These waves got harder and harder and spawned on a timer, so this raid was very much the first real DPS check. If waves started to spawn while previous ones were still alive, it usually meant a wipe. These waves were also a major check for your healers and tanks, as some of the mobs, like the dreadnoughts, hit harder than some raid bosses, so everyone needed to be on top of their game. Finally, turn 5. This turn looks like what raids are today. No mobs or trash, just a room with a boss. And the boss, the mighty one herself, is the legendary Twintani. In the beginning of raid progression, groups the world over found it nearly impossible to progress. This was due to one of Twintania's main abilities, Twister. The Twister ability spawned multiple Twisters under players, which they had to move away from before they arrived or they would kill the player. One of the main issues with Twister at the time is that they kept spawning with inconsistent rates. They also had a much longer range at which they would explode, if the player was too near and didn't move far enough away or quick enough. Sprint used TP back then, so it was a last resort. As such, most if not all found it impossible to dodge all the Twisters. It wasn't long until SE made a change to Twister, removing the max range mechanic around it so players had a much easier time dodging them. After this change, groups began to clear turn 5. Twintania had everything: ads, stack mechanics, dodging, multiple different phases with dive bombs, AoEs, and the dreaded Twisters. Not to mention the walls of the arena were made of fire. Second Coil of Bahamut is regarded highly by those who raided it when it was current tier, including myself. It wasn't an easy time, but it formed the core of what raiding would be for the rest of A Realm Reborn. An interesting fact to note is, while many groups were progressing to turn 4 and turn 5, we were introduced to the advanced combat tracker, so it allowed players to actually gauge how much DPS they were actually doing at the time. However, we didn't have a way to properly analyze that data. I hope you enjoyed this video. The next one will be going over the Second Coil of Bahamut, as well as his introduction to the Savage tier. Thanks for watching, and have a good one.